Hey folks, Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case doing a video on how to select a good machete. Now, machetes are usually not the kind of tool you see people using a whole lot. I mean, usually like in Central America, South America, you see folks with either huge machetes or smaller ones, and yeah, those guys are going to be using these as daily tools all day long. And that's why you have some of the better known machete manufacturers from Central and South America doing a good job about that, like with Tramontina, some other local brands. They usually do good tools because they actually get used a lot. So the question is, how do you select a good one? Well, that would be my first tip. Look at what is actually being used by people that handle these tools all day long. It's not one specific type of machete that you have. You're going to be seeing different kinds. If someone is cutting sugar cane all day long, they're probably going to be having like a longer, bigger machete. If it's someone using it more like a utilitarian tool, it's likely to be a shorter Latin machete, or even a broken one, or just one that they cut to a shorter length. They're cheap, so that's one of the advantages. Here I have the one that I've used. I mean, this is one I've used for many years. I modified. This was originally a Tramontina machete. I did a clip point here, tried to do a little bit of an awful serration job. Didn't go all that well, but I ended up putting a good grip in it. The plastic one original was fine. It was a little bit small for my hand, so you know, when you do things yourself, you get to do them exactly to your your needs or your requirements. So this one fits my hand a lot nicer. So the original one was up to maybe here with a little bit more length. I get a bit more real estate there for a good grip. This is a knife I've been using for many years, and it's always been very handy for me. So first tip, manufacturer, Tramontina. These guys have been making machetes for I don't know how long, and they're from Brazil. If there's a place where machetes are being used as daily used tools, that's Brazil. So Tramontina, good to go. In terms of the geometry of the blade, look how thin this is, and there's nothing wrong with that. A machete should be very thin. Here's where you see some of these more commercial marketing type of blades that are supposed to be for jungle, junglas, right? This is a little bit of a too wide and too big as a machete. Even the steel, this is 1095, great steel, but really for a machete, maybe 1095 is not the thing. You're going to be wanting something a little bit more practical, and by that I mean sometimes even cheap, affordable steel. Look, there's really nothing wrong with 420 steel. A lot of people crap on it like it's the worst junk ever. It's really not. It is very tough steel. It gets a decent edge, and of course, it's not going to be holding an edge very long, but it's flexible, it's tough as nails, you can beat on it all day long, it's gonna be very strong, and sharpening it often, it's still gonna be cutting good enough. Keep in mind that a machete is intended for lighter vegetation. The idea is you're gonna be cutting softer green vegetation, and not like wood, where you wanna use maybe a hatchet or an axe, or maybe even a bigger knife. Makes sense for that sort of thing, but for a real machete, it's going to be lightweight, flexible, tough blade. So yeah, don't go about it. Look, here I have, this is a Chinese machete, and this is a little bit too thick. I'm sure it's great and all, but it's just a little bit too thick as a machete. Maybe for cutting, something like sugar cane or something a little bit like that. But again, I insist, lighter machete makes work a lot easier, and as long as you touch up that edge every once in a while, it's going to be a lot easier to go with this for hours, swinging it around without getting tired. So that in terms of steel, I'm not opposed to going with a stainless steel that does its job, and it's not going to be rusting. If this had been a carbon steel, it would have been in a lot worse shape. This basic stainless, which is likely 420, maybe even 420 HC, high carbon 420, but it's still very much stain resistant. This, on the other hand, this is a cold steel, and this is a great machete as well. These are made in South Africa. South Africans know how to make decent decent machetes, that's for sure. And they go with a carbon steel blade, and this is likely like 1055. Again, wonderful steel for a machete. It's gonna be a carbon steel, which a lot of people like, me included. And it's maybe gonna be taking a nicer edge and holding that edge a little bit longer, but on the other hand, it's gonna be rusting, so that's why this is painted. After all these years of really using this machete, I can't complain, really. It just holds an edge decently enough, and it's very easy to sharpen. You know, not all steels are easy enough to sharpen, especially if you get into some of the higher quality steels. I know a bit about this, especially the recent research I did for my own knife, which, by the way, it's doing great. I'm going to be having news soon enough. But one of the things you find out is there's kind of like a trade-off. If you have like this idea that cheap, crappy steels are bad, there's really nothing all that bad these days. Even the more affordable steels are decent enough, and sometimes they're super tough as well. Sure, they're not going to be holding the edge as a fancier steel. Now, what happens with some of the fancier steels that get to very high hardnesses and hold an edge very long is they're often very hard to sharpen. Now, you have some specific steels that hold an edge very well and are also relatively easy to sharpen because of the constitution of the steel, the composition of it, the kind of grain that you have and heat treatment and such. You have some higher end steels that hold an edge decently enough and are still easy enough to sharpen, but you're going to be paying for that a lot, maybe excessively so. And there's not a direct correlation between the price of how much more you're paying for. I mean, something a lot cheaper is probably good enough for your needs, all right? So Tramontina, definitely a good brand. Cold steel, they do make, sometimes they're a little bit out there with their, they're very brave with some of their designs, a little bit less, classics and such, but you have all sorts of machetes from cold steel. You have the Latin machetes, you have this one that's kind of like a pirate sword of some kind, which I like a lot. This is very nicely balanced blade. And with 1055 steel, that's a great carbon steel for a machete, even though it's going to be, rusting more and you want to have that finish. 1055 is a carbon steel that has 0.55 of carbon in its steel. 1085, it's going to be having 0.85. 1075 is 0.75. So that's why 1095, which is a famously used steel for many of these larger blades and for survival knives, 1095, a classic carbon steel for survival knives, that's going to be having more carbon. It's going to be holding an edge a bit longer as well, and that's why it's so favored. It's a tough blade, but also keep in mind the thing that often goes without mention, the geometry. So some of the cheaper steels are actually tougher than some of the more expensive steels. That's why you sometimes see some of the torture tests in which a crappy cheap knife made of some of the cheapest steel, maybe a 420 or 420 HC or a 1055, takes a lot more abuse than a 1095. So what's that about? Well, the thing is that 1055 is going to be taking more abuse, but it's not going to be holding an edge as nicely as your 1055 steel. At the same time, because of the blade geometry, you have a lot of steel in here, so it's going to be pretty sturdy and tough as well. Then you have some of these, but again, 1095, that's going to be rusting even more so than your 1055. So that's why you absolutely need that epoxy finish. I wouldn't call this a good machete, going back to the topic of this video. These would be the good machetes, the Tramontinas, the Condors, and a bunch of other local manufacturers across different countries, especially in South America and Central America. This, even though it's called the Junglas, I wouldn't go about my way bashing around with this blade. It's a bit too heavy, a bit too wide for actually being used like a real machete. Now, this length is nice. For a short machete, it's going to be doing nicely, but not this thick of a blade. And probably if you're going to be going thinner, you're going to be wanting something else than 1095. All right, and then you have something like this, very similar. I wouldn't call these good machetes. In my mind, these are not even machetes. These would be like big blades, a big knife, which is perfectly fine. It's something different. It's not a machete, but it's a nice big knife. Same thing with Bushwhacker Mistress by Bussy. These are high-end knives. They're gonna be expensive. I think they're going like for $500 last time I checked, if you find one of these. And yeah, these are expensive. These are though made out of Enfi steel, which is the proprietary steel and the heat treatment by Bussy. These hold an edge very well. These are tough as nails, very strong, durable steel. Takes a beating, and it's very much resistant to corrosion. It's kind of like a stainless, but they don't leave that, because instead of doing the satin finish that you sometimes find in cheaper knives, instead of doing that, they do the epoxy finish. If you want to have that satin finish with Bussy, you're going to be paying like $100 more. Which is the reason why I do this, so as to not have to polish that blade in this manner, which is a bit more work and time, and the cost goes up. Fantastic seal, kind of crappy finish, because if you want the nicer one, the satin finish, you have to pay for that. I'm happy with this as it is, but that would be the advice. In terms of carbon or stainless, man, it's up to you, but these days with stainless, even the more affordable one, especially for a tool, a machete that you're going to be using a lot, go with stainless. That's going to be easier to keep and not have to worry about this finish coming off and rusting all over. In terms of length, it could be whatever as you want. It could be like a 14-inch blade, 20-inch, whatever it is, depending on your needs. My advice though is, for a survival machete, which is going to be more in that survival knife type of territory, go with a shorter machete. The shorter machete is a lot more handier, like a big knife. No, it's not going to be going through wood as nicely as a big knife with a thicker blade, but for chopping in general and as a practical tool all day long, machetes are fantastic. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this little video. Have an awesome day. Take care.